I'd like to welcome everyone to the sixth meeting of the School Funding Task Force. We call this meeting to order. I'd like to remind everyone to turn off your cell phones or have them on silent. When the roll is called, please indicate if you are at home remotely or you're here in the annex if you're not here in the room. When you join the meeting remotely, your microphones were automatically muted. So please remember to unmute your microphone before speaking. If you have a question or comment during the meeting, please indicate that in the meeting's chat function. A link to the meeting materials was sent to members, and they are available on the task force's page on the LRC website. At this time, I'd ask Chris to please call the roll.
Senator Givens, Senator Thomas.
Chairman Tipton, I'm here. I'm out of state.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Wilson, Representative Banta.
Here in the 63rd.
Representative Bojanowski.
I'm here in the building.
Representative Johnson.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Wise.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Tipton.
I present in the room. Like to recognize and thank my co-chair, Senator Wise, on this endeavor over the last few months. You have any comments to begin with this morning?
Just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank our LRC staff and all the members who participated. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. We'd like to welcome Associate Commissioner Robin Kinney to the task force as the invited representative from Kentucky Department of Education. And we also want to thank Chuck Truesdale for his participation in prior meetings. We certainly appreciate his input and look forward to working with him in his new role in the future. Any members have any comments or anyone you'd like to recognize at this time? Okay, then we will proceed with our agenda. The 2021 regular session House Bills 563 and 405 required the Department of Education to submit a report regarding funding of non-resident students. At the last meeting, KDE previewed the report during a presentation. Since then, a written report has been submitted. And members, you should have received a copy of the report, and the report is available online at our task force's website. We've invited KDE back to have a follow-up discussion on that report. I will make one comment. During our last meeting, we had a conversation about the legal proceedings regarding House Bill 563. There was some discussion of whether or not House Bill 563 had been struck down by Judge Shepard entirely, or just the section on the education opportunity accounts. Since that time, I have seen comments from Judge Shepard that he has clarified that the portion on district-to-district transfer was not struck down in his ruling. He will be issuing a written clarification on that at some time in the future, so it's very relevant that we had this continued conversation today. So at this time, I'll invite the presenters to come to the table, and please identify yourself for the record. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Tipton and Chair Wise. My name is Robin Kinney. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations at the Kentucky Department of Education.
Good morning, Todd Allen, General Counsel for the Department of Education.
Good morning, Che Ritter with the Kentucky Department of Education.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for inviting us to talk. We're going to provide a brief summary of the report that was filed by the Department of Education. It was required to be filed by November 1st. And we're just going to kind of go through the report at a high level and then allow any questions that you might have about the report. As Chair Tipton started us off, House Bill 563 as well as House Bill 405 required the department to provide information on the equitable transfer of education funds, so that funds follow a non-resident student from the resident district to a non-resident district where they would be enrolled. The report shall include recommendations on options on how to make that transfer happen and the calculations and mechanism to make that occur. Education funds for purposes of our report focused primarily on SEEK, but we also kind of talked a little bit about other state funds and federal funds, and also we talked about local revenue that is collected by our local school districts. So it might be helpful to have just a really brief overview of how it works right now, and then we'll go into those options, calculations, and mechanisms. So currently, school districts may receive funding for non-resident students. Non-resident students can be included in their average daily attendance if they meet certain necessary criteria. Under our existing statute, KRS 157-350, which is the SEEK eligibility statutes by which districts qualify to be eligible for distributions from SEEK, they can use non-resident students under certain criteria. Under the statute, and this is in place until July 1st of 2022, pupils listed under a written agreement between a non-resident district and a resident district may enter into a voluntary agreement and allow those students to be transferred. They can also include students that are children of parents that are employed in the non-resident district can also be included in that ADA calculation. What our districts do right now is they code those non-resident students in Infinite Campus, and so we have an idea about how many are included right now. It may be helpful for you to know that based upon that information recorded right now by our districts, we pulled two sets of data for your information from 18-19 and from 21-22. And there are about 26,000 students right now that are coded as non-resident students each year. That's across several years. We've had a little bit of changes with COVID right now as reporting, so we pulled from 18-19, which was pre-COVID, and the most recent year of 21-22. This would include those non-resident students that are voluntary non-resident under those agreements between our districts, students of those parents that are employed in the districts, and it also includes non-contract students who are not included in our ADA. So there can still be students going to a non-resident districts, but those are not included in ADA. And those non-contract students are kept out when SAR is done, which is the superintendent's annual attendance report. They're coded a little bit differently, again, not included in ADA for SEEK purposes. But once those students are coded that way, for practical purposes, they are treated the same as resident students for SEEK funding. So once we know they're in there, they meet those statutory requirements, they are treated as a resident student. There's not this distinction between a resident or non-resident students. This is also true for a lot of our state funding, state grant opportunities. So you may be familiar with our large line items that may use ADA as part of the calculation. Again, once they are coded and are eligible, then we don't really distinguish between a resident or non-resident student. For all practical purposes, those are a student of that district that they are enrolled. Currently, those students are enrolled in a non-resident district under a voluntary agreement, and how does that happen? Districts have different agreements between each other, and that is left at the local level currently. So you may have districts that do a one-to-one exchange, meaning every student that comes to my district, an equal student will be permitted to go to your district. Other districts have any and all, meaning whatever students want to come to your district may come, and whatever of my students that want to go to your district may go. So every district has a little bit of different variation. There are some districts that choose not to enter into non-resident agreements. And when that happens, if one of those districts would like for those students to be enrolled, there is an appeal process to the Commissioner of the Department of Education and to the Kentucky Board of Education if there's no agreement reached. So that's kind of how it works right now. If an appeal is filed and those districts can't work it out, KRS 157-350 requires the department to consider factors affecting the districts, including academic performance and the impact on programs and operations. So we would be required to look at facilities, transportation, and staffing as we're trying to work that out with those districts. So let's take a look forward now. With the passage of House Bill 563, districts will no longer enter into non-resident agreements with each other. Instead, they will enter into non-resident policies, again by July 1st, 2022. And once they enter into those policies, those students admitted under those policies may be included in the district's ADA for funding purposes. There are still several questions about House Bill 563 that this report did not go into. Clarification on capacity or clarification on discrimination, some of the elements of those policies and what they look like. Rather, our report just really focused on the funding aspect. Current processes for coding, we anticipate at the Department of Education, coding your students as non-resident students will pretty much remain the same. We think operationally, for purposes of SEEK, there's really not a lot of difference that needs to happen to our systems in order to operationalize House Bill 563. So let's talk a little bit about local revenue, because that's the last piece as far as we have state revenue comprised of SEEK. We have state and federal funds. Again, we see very much the same opportunities and process operationally to effectuate that transfer or that assignment or allocation of funds. But with the local revenue, which is the other component that local school districts receive, it gets a little trickier in our opinion. So local school boards are independent taxing authorities pursuant to KRS 160.455. Local tax revenues are not collected by, received, or distributed by the Department of Education. So they don't come through the Department of Education for purposes of allocation. Rather, they are collected either locally or they're collected by the Department of Revenue. Additionally, I think it's worth noting that the amount of taxes levied by a district at the local level is not what they necessarily collect. So there's always some percentage, just like with other taxes that are assessed, that don't get collected either at all, or they don't get collected in a timely manner. So that's worth pointing out. And of course, we're talking about real and personal property taxes, motor vehicle taxes, permissive taxes, and then those local utility, occupational, or excise taxes. So the transfer of local funds, and we have contained in our report an analysis of the transfer of local funds to non-resident districts either directly or indirectly may raise constitutional challenges. And I think it's also worth saying, reasonable legal advisors and scholars may differ in the interpretation of that, but we are putting forth in our report sort of things for the General Assembly to consider as you move forward. We looked at 4 possible options related, again, to local revenues. The first being no transfer of local funds. Of course, that is probably the safest and easiest to accomplish because it doesn't give rise to the other possible constitutional or legal challenges that we've set forth in the report. The other 3 options that we looked at were requiring a resident district to transfer the local funds portion directly to a non-resident district, so a district-to-district transfer. The second was require an adjustment of SEEK at the state level to provide additional funds for non-resident districts while decreasing to the corresponding resident district from which the student had come from. And then finally, we looked at the General Assembly providing a separate appropriation outside of SEEK to provide additional funds to districts, admitting those non-resident students. Again, we think through options 2 through 4, there may be some legal challenges, both based upon the Kentucky Constitution and the legal case of Rose versus Council for Better Education. Again, we provide these as thoughts for the General Assembly to consider. I'm not going to go into the legal analysis of each of those that are contained in the report in the interest of time. We do have our General Counsel here, Todd Allen, in case we have questions as we kind of move forward. The last piece that the department was asked to provide to the General Assembly was calculation and the mechanism for transfer of those funds. And so based upon which option the General Assembly would pursue, we have some ideas of how that might work based upon either data we currently collect and hold or things that we might be able to do in the future. Again, I would emphasize that for state funds, federal funds, and for SEEK, where we're not adjusting the SEEK computation for local funding revenue, we don't think that we'll have a lot of difficulty in making those transfers occur. It is only when we get to the local revenue level that we may have some challenges. I'll also use this opportunity to put in a plug for funding for our financial SEEK mechanism, our SEEK system. It is fairly antiquated, and depending on what the General Assembly desires, it is very difficult for us to sort of do what-if scenarios in our current system. And so I'll put a plug in there for our SEEK system to be updated. However, if KDE is requested to determine how much local revenue should be transferred from a resident district to a non-resident district, either directly or by operation of adjustment to SEEK, we could use the district's last record of their annual financial report to determine what the local revenues look like. I would caution that we'll need some timing, because the timing of when those annual financial reports come in and when we'll be needing that information in order to make the calculation, we'd have to think about that. We would also, one question we would have for the General Assembly is about, in the current calculation of SEEK, we do look backwards for a year. So would we be looking at that, or would we be looking at just in a more in the calendar year timing? So that's something we need some assistance in thinking through. But we could probably figure out a way to do this. In the event there is a separate appropriation outside of SEEK, and you're trying to determine how much that appropriation or what that appropriation should look like, the General Assembly could consider a flat per pupil kind of extra amount. We could help you with how many students, again, looking at what our data shows as the number of students right now, and then adjust off of that for those non-contract students so you could get an idea of what that appropriation might look like. Or you could, we could try to look at, again, that local revenue that is being brought into the resident district currently, and try to come up with a per pupil amount that way, and then look at that as you build your appropriation, what that would look like, again, based on historical information. The department really stands available to assist in trying to determine, after the General Assembly makes their decisions, on what option or other options you may consider for the transfer of funds to the resident districts. But really at this point in time, we probably need a little more guidance on which option you may choose, and then we'll be happy to be available to share with you what data we have available or what mechanisms could be accomplished quickly. So this is a very high overview of our report, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have as task force members.
Thank you, Robin. I'll begin. I certainly appreciate the work on this. I know these are not easy things to comprehend and work through, and I appreciate giving the 4 options to consider in some of the issues. And this question will probably go to Mr. Allen, and more specifically on options 3 and 4, whether there's an adjustment to SEEK or a separate allocation. What does KDE see as the potential legal concerns there in those 2 options? Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So just for clarification, option number 3 would be adjusting SEEK, and we'll drill down on that a little bit more. Adjusting SEEK beyond just the change in per pupil. So if one pupil moves from District A to District B, there's a natural change in that just based on the ADA system that we currently operate. But as we understand the question in our report, anticipated making a further adjustment to transfer more state SEEK dollars to District B for that pupil, and reducing state SEEK dollars to District A beyond just the natural per pupil allocation. The issues that could exist with that, and as Robin indicated, obviously, I don't wear a black robe, I don't make the decisions, but we did some research and put this together for information for the General Assembly and anyone who's interested. Is that creates a system that we believe would open the door to challenges under the Rose decision. So the first question that begs is, why do we need to transfer more than the state per pupil allocation from District A to District B? Is it because the per pupil allocation isn't sufficient for an adequate education, as Rose indicated? If it is sufficient, then perhaps we don't need to make a transfer. If it isn't sufficient, maybe that's the reason we're looking to make a transfer. So that is one argument that exists in that situation. Number two is, naturally what would have to happen if you're reducing the amount of state SEEK funds to District A, where the pupil lives, beyond the per pupil allocation, then what that does is, in essence, eats into their local revenues. And we have constitutional language that says if a local tax is passed for one purpose, it can never be directed to another purpose. Now, we can argue back and forth about whether that purpose is education in general or education for that particular school district. But we have a lot of history and precedent that indicates the taxes that a local school district passes above that 30-cent minimum that's required by the General Assembly is to supplement their local system. That's what the Rose decision said, and the General Assembly even has a statute that indicates that. So we could anticipate school districts saying, you're taking revenue that was meant to supplement our local system and transferring it to another school district. That was not the purpose of the tax. Another possible argument. And then finally, there's the equity issue. The Rose decision also addressed equity among students throughout the state and providing both an adequate and equitable education. And in the scenario of providing more SEEK funding to District B, less SEEK funding to District A, that creates a situation where the per pupil state allotment isn't equitable. That is, students in District B are getting more from the state per pupil than the students in District A.
And I assume that also would apply to option 4 on the direct
the equity issue.
appropriation. Okay. I appreciate that input. We have a question from Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to seek some clarification, so it may take more than one question to get my question right. So in option 1, is it a transfer of the students but no transfer of funding at all? Is that what I understood?
No, just the local revenue portion would not be transferred.
Okay.
The other SEEK funding would be transferred, and then opportunities under state and local grant funding would also be possible. Mm-hmm.
So if a student transfers from one local system to another, the system that's receiving the student would not receive any local funding, any additional local funding, correct?
In option 1, that's correct.
So I think this is my last question, Mr. Chairman. So does the system receiving the student have the option of choosing not to receive the student, given that they will be having an additional head in the system but no additional funding?
Yes, I think the way House Bill 563 contemplates, each district will come up with their non-resident policy by which they receive students. So they could put a cap on the number of students that they wish to receive as they're thinking about funding that will be received by them. If they think that is not going to be sufficient, they could put a cap on it. So they don't have to take that student. Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. I can just see that conversation immediately. Well, if we're accepting another student, we need more local money. And there we go. So thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll make a comment, and I think it goes to option 1. You could have a school district, a county out in the state that's surrounded by 4 or 5 counties, and they may possibly be receiving non-resident students from those districts into their districts. And each one of those counties would have a different state portion of SEEK funds. So one county may have a much higher portion, one county may have a much lower portion. So that's part of the calculus that school districts will have to determine. Do any of our superintendents, I know, and school board members, I know this is something that would impact you. Do you all have any comments you would like to add to this discussion?
From a perspective of schools remaining open, the geography of different districts are very different. For example, if you look at one of the schools that I have, so this not necessarily relates to funding, but it does relate to open borders. I have students that can get to other schools much more quickly and would possibly transfer out. With that happening, that's a possibility of closing down a school. So currently in this one particular school that I have, phenomenal school, actually a 5-star school. Their middle school is a 5-star school. The last time we had our state allocation, our state accountability, but unfortunately the students that can't afford to drive elsewhere would have to stay. So right now those students who come to high school are on a bus an hour and a half one way. So then if I close that down, it's quite a possibility that my elementary students would have to go an hour and a half one way. So again, when we talk about funding, there's more to the picture than just funding. I think everybody knows that. But for us, and I think you could probably find other districts very similar to that too. So that's my one comment. When we talk about open borders, there's a possibility of closing schools, and for other districts it could be opening more schools. So something to keep in mind.
Representative Tipton, I think one thing to clarify too, if a student's going to the student in District A goes to District B would be receiving their SEEK value, not the other district SEEK value, correct? So that would be one thing we would be able to, we could plan on that, but the factor of waiting a year behind, that's where things get very difficult. I think Representative Tipton, like you're saying, if we know we're going to receive X amount of SEEK funding for a student, then we have to make that decision as a local district of, and we take 300 kids. I think one of the big discussions throughout the superintendents with the new bill would be, what are those criteria for allowing students in? Because when we give that true open border, if we're just picking and choosing, I think that becomes very difficult. So as a district, we would have to decide if we want to take open enrollment, which I think most districts would, but then where does that cap become feasible financially? And if we know that number, I think it's feasible. If we start shifting, if I take students and all of a sudden start losing a lot of local money, then that becomes a very hard scale to try to go. If I know I'm receiving so much money per student and I take that, I can kind of work my budget that way. But if you start taking that local money out, I think that becomes very difficult on all districts.
We have a question from Ms. Page.
I was just going to add to the conversation on this. This is a very complicated question. It's opened a lot of what ifs and a lot of questions about how to properly handle it that need to be given careful consideration. But as I stated in our last meeting, local funds, I strongly believe, need to stay with the local district. They're raised by the local district. They're paid by the local residents to educate the students in that district. And I feel very strongly that that's where they need to stay. Thank you.
Appreciate these comments and your input. As has been mentioned, this is a complex issue. I don't believe we're going to come up with the answers to this issue today. And if you'll probably have already looked at our recommendations, you will see that we're going to recommend further discussion and input on this as going forward. I've been reminded that in my haste to get to the agenda, I forgot to get approval from the minutes for the last meeting. They should be in your package. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion. It may have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. I was so excited about getting to all this information, I forgot to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. The next item on our agenda is actually the essence of why we've been meeting these several last 6 months over the interim, and that is recommendations to the General Assembly. Co-Chair Wise and I have met since our last meeting. We have reviewed all the testimony that has been given by our presenters. We have listened to the comments from members of the task force, and we certainly appreciate that. And we have submitted a set of recommendations, and you should have a copy of those. I just need to find my copy here. Oh, thank you, Josh. You got that handy there. Let me, and this is, you probably saw this. This was in the form of a memorandum to Senate President Stivers and House Speaker Osborne for the Legislative Research Commission. It's just a summary that the School Funding Task Force convened 6 times to review the entirety of the K-12 funding mechanism, to review the reports and analysis of school funding, and review possible changes to the distribution of funds to Kentucky's public schools. Testimony was provided by the Kentucky Department of Education, the Southern Regional Education Board, the Legislative Research Commission's Office of Education Accountability, school superintendents, and school board members. Upon considering the testimony and information provided, the co-chairs, after consultation with the task force members and invited experts, recommend the following. Number 1, the General Assembly permanently authorize the full funding of kindergarten in statute and ensure districts receive the appropriate equalization funding as a result of this change. Recommendation number 2, the General Assembly give consideration to transitioning from using average daily attendance in the funding calculation to using average daily membership in a manner that minimizes extreme funding changes for school districts while also maintaining incentives for student attendance and accountability for school districts. Recommendation number 3, the General Assembly develop a plan to return to full state funding of district transportation. Recommendation number 4, the General Assembly develop a plan to achieve full funding of the School Safety and Resiliency Act of 2019. Number 5, the General Assembly provide funding to expand use of the state's family resource and youth services centers that have proven to effectively provide wraparound services to students in Kentucky schools. Recommendation number 6, the General Assembly, in consultation with the Legislative Research Commission, explore the development of a school district impact statement to inform legislators about a bill's potential costs to local school districts. Number 7, the Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee include in its 2022 Office of Education Accountability Research Agenda a review of the most recent studies measuring the cost of an adequate public education in Kentucky and similar states, with a focus on the methods used in those studies, the outcomes, and the cost associated with educating special student populations. This is in reference to the added weights that are in part of the SEEK formula to verify that those are sufficient in today's economy. Recommendation number 8, the Legislative Research Commission refer the report submitted by the Kentucky Department of Education pursuant to 2021 House Bill 405 to the standing Senate and House Committees on Appropriations and Revenue for additional consideration during the 2022 regular session due to the late deadline for receiving the report. And I'll just comment here that deadline was November 1st of this year, which we received in a timely manner, but due to our meeting schedule and only 1 week, we felt that this needed further consideration, and we made this recommendation to the A&R committees. Recommendation number 9, the Legislative Research Commission continue to study and review the issues of school funding and the updating of the school funding system through referral of the issue to an interim joint committee during the 2022 interim. The co-chair suggests the General Assembly and Legislative Research Commission employ these recommendations during the 2022 regular session. And we have a comment or question from Representative Bojanowski.
Yes. Comment, actually. So I just want to say I do fully support each of the initiatives that are listed here. They're reasonable and they really tie into everything that I've learned within this process. I do want to elaborate a little bit on number 7. I highly recommend that you go back and read the Rose decision and reflect on our duty to provide an adequate public education. And I think it's essential that we do the research to find out what what we need to do, what it'll cost to provide an adequate education where every child is given the opportunity to learn. And I do want, also in number 7, I do want to just specify one specific situation about the problematic situation right now with educating special student populations. As a special education teacher in an elementary school, I have a couple of children with autism. Looking at the numbers for JCPS at its current SEEK level, the factor to fund a child with autism, services for a child with autism, is 2.35 times the SEEK amount. So in JCPS, $6,088 additional dollars are appropriated for that child with autism. If a district's SEEK is $4,000, that district will get $9,400 to educate a child with autism. And the problematic situation is that special education is a federal mandate. However, federal funding is only 10% of the promised 40% that they would contribute. So I definitely thank the chairs for this process. I'm hopeful that I could sit on a further committee in this manner, and I appreciate these findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bojanowski, and certainly appreciate your input during this process. We do have a question or comment from Representative Johnson.
It's a comment, Mr. Chairman. First off, I just want to add my support for the recommendations that you guys have put into writing here today. I think we are on the right track. I just wanted to also emphasize recommendation number 9 in that I think we're beyond the first step in this process. I hate it when we say that we're on the first step only. We're beyond that, but we're not at the last step yet either. So I think that interim committee for 2022 will be vital and very much worthwhile with going forward with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have a comment from Devonna Page.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm very pleased with these recommendations, particularly the kindergarten and the transportation funding, but I'm also a very big supporter of the Friskies program, so I'm very pleased to see that included in the recommendations as well. So thank you.
I have a comment from Superintendent Fletcher.
Thank you, Chairman Tipton. A couple of comments actually on number 6, recommendation number 6. I think this is very important as we move forward. I don't want to gloss over this at all because I think this is very, very important for districts. The General Assembly, in consultation with the Legislative Research Commission, explored the development of a school district impact statement to inform legislators about a bill's potential cost to school districts. There's a lot of times that we have unfunded mandates, and I think that was something we mentioned as we went through. So I'd like to thank the gentlemen for including, ladies, for including this. I think this is very important for school districts. But also, too, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about equity for just a second. I sent out some information to each member talking about teacher salaries as it relates to quintiles. If you look at the OEA report, and we've alluded to this report several times in here, if you look at the average amount of pupil spent per student in quintile 1, which is a property poor district, it's about $8,849 according to the OEA report. That increases when you get into 3, 4, and 5 all the way up to $11,814 for property rich districts. So you're looking at discrepancies when you move from property poor districts of $2,965 to quintile 2 is $3,000 discrepancy from quintile 5. Quintile 3 is $2,600 and $2,400 for quintile 4. So one of the other issues we've talked about in a lot of other settings is talking about teacher salaries. And if you look at just based on that information, there's a sizable discrepancy in how much an average salary is for each teacher. For example, if you look at a rank 1, if you take the absolute highest district in the state and compare it with the lowest district, when I'm talking about property value, there's a $24,000 difference in those two teachers' salaries. If you look at average, when we're talking about quintile 1, the average teacher salary in quintile 1, which is property poor districts, is $49,910. As you move up to quintile 5, it's $60,069. And if you take out Livingston and Lyon County, which are included in that, you're up to $65,000 average salary for a teacher. which again, I think teachers should be paid more. But when we look at the funding as it relates to property rich versus property poor districts, not only is there a discrepancy in how much is spent on per student, that gives them more opportunities. So you're looking at also with teacher salary, there's a discrepancy there also. Of course, the last comment I'll make is that continued funding of teacher retirement, and also the medical insurance for retirees also too as we move forward. So again, I hope everyone had the opportunity to read over that information I sent out, because I think that really shows what a discrepancy that a property rich district versus property poor district could be in something as huge as teacher salaries. Thank you. And one other comment, I'm sorry. I do agree with what's recommended here. I think from our standpoint, if a few of these are truly considered, we really appreciate that. Everything from full day kindergarten to also the transportation, that would be great for every single district in our state. So thank you for that.
I appreciate your comments and input. In regard to your comments, a lot of what you're referring to are going to be budget decisions that are made every biennium. Going back to the 2020 session, prior to COVID, I was on the budget conference committee, and while it was very modest, there was on the table a discussion of a 1% increase for all state employees. And I think going into this 2022 session, I'm speaking for myself now, we have to invest in our most important asset in state government, and that is our employees, and that is all the way across the board, our state police, our dedicated state employees, and all our agencies, as well as our teachers. And this is something I think we have to take a very serious and sincere look at in how we appropriate funding for those issues, as well as all these others. We have a comment from Co-Chair Wise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate working with you on these recommendations, as well as everyone who's contributed and all of our speakers we've had provide us input. And I could not agree more with your comments there. I think when we look at salaries for attracting the best and brightest to state police, to education, social workers along the lines, this legislative session, we have to take a serious look at that. I also want to say, with having 9 recommendations on here, this is kind of like 9 things on your child's Christmas wish list. As we're getting ready to approach the Christmas holiday. And with that, just so the general public knows, I know we've got media here, when we take recommendations like this, we will provide this once again to House and Senate leadership, and we'll see what the best we can do. But I do think these are excellent recommendations, fully support. And Superintendent Fletcher, you make a great point as we talk about that impact statement on number 6. I've seen it with a lot of health and welfare bills. We do fiscal notes, and sometimes those are indeterminable. And sometimes we ask, how did you come to that question with the fiscal note? And somebody in the back room does those, probably a Chuck Truesdale mind or somebody like that. So I do think this is very good when we discuss mandates, unfunded mandates for districts to be able to look at. So I'm excited going forward. I know we've had some positive comments about the recommendations. So I think this legislative session, we've got a lot of work to do, and then into 2022 as well, for what we're going to continue to work on. Thank you, everyone.
Does any other task force member have a comment or question at this time? Well, I want to thank all the members of the school.
Representative Tipton?
Oh, there is Senator Thomas. I was wondering where you were, Senator Thomas.
Yes, sir, Representative Tipton.
Please proceed.
I actually had put some comments in the chat. I wanted to hear from Senator Wise first, but I would like to make about 3 or 4 comments, if I may, please. May I proceed?
Please proceed.
Okay, yes. First of all, I want to say I think you and Max did an excellent job in putting together these recommendations. You know, I read this early this morning, and I fully agree with all of them. So my hat is off to you and Max for the recommendations. I want to say that first and foremost. Both of you have done an excellent job chairing this task force. I think you have really moved this state forward over the summer with this task force. So I want to put that in the record first. I want the record to reflect my comments there. Number 2, of the 9, which I agree, the one I think is the best is number 6. I can't remember what superintendent said that, but I'm a firm believer in having differential impact statements for different subject matters we addressed. And I think having a school district impact statement is a step in this direction. I hope in this decade, we move from just a fiscal impact statement to maybe having 4 or 5 separate impact statements dealing with a variety of subject matters that we address. Because our most important priority in this state, if you look at our budget, is education, Representative Tipton. And as we proceed to advance education in the state, we don't want to have any unfunded mandates. We don't want to pass legislation while with good intentions may cause fiscal burdens or financial burdens to the school district. So I think number 6 of all the 9, number 6 is the best, and I hope we implement that as a General Assembly in 2022. My third comment is this. I strongly agree with number 9. Representative Johnson made a comment about number 9. I fully endorse his comment. I think we did good work this year with the school funding task force, but there's a lot more work to do. And what I've seen in the past, sometimes in the General Assemblies, we have these task force, we do a good job, but we don't finish the job. And then the next year, the task force gets disbanded, and we're just kind of left hanging over the cliff with incomplete work, which troubles me. So I really hope President Stivers and Speaker Osborne take this to heart and continue this task force through 2022. I agree with Representative Johnson on that point. I only have one question, and I would like to hear from you and Max on this. As you know, I've been troubled by the talk about eliminating school attendance. I must say that since my last meeting, I've talked to several people about this issue. And some have told me that they think that is a good idea, that we do look at membership along the way. I'd like to hear from you and Max as to what your rationale is for having consideration for moving from school attendance, from emphasis on school attendance to school membership. Max, if you could go first, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Looking at that, I think the discussions that we had in here, especially hearing from our folks at KDE, I think the explanation when we had Mr. Ritter, for me, was very convincing for me to look at as it relates to equity, relates to accountability and some things that are there. I think we need to look going forward from a bigger picture as we relate to attendance. I think we have looked at this funding issue through COVID to continue to go back to 2018-19. We've got to start getting away from that model and looking at some things to do. I think this may be an opportune time that COVID has presented to us to maybe look at the way we do daily attendance. And with the membership model, I want to study it more because I've got the recommendation on there, and I've worked and do have some approval for that. I'm very positive about it. I do think though we need to have further conversations about that, bring in more people, more stakeholders to it. But that's kind of my comments in terms of my support for it.
Senator Thomas, I thank you for this question. I think it's a very serious conversation that we need to have, and we need to go through it in a very thoughtful process. As I've listened to comments and testimony from this task force, there are two really main issues that have caused me to think this is something that we might need to consider, going from the funding model based on average daily attendance to average daily membership. Number one is the COVID issue that we have dealt with over the last 18 to 20 months. School district superintendents have had to make some very serious decisions about having school in person, closing school. When they have students who test positive, there are other students who have to quarantine. Just because a student has to quarantine at home does not mean that school district is not trying to provide them an education, does not mean they're incurring the same cost. So we've got the cost of educating a student regardless of whether that student's there 95% of the time, 90% of the time, or 100% of the time. And I will emphasize this. In no way do we want to de-emphasize school attendance. And whatever we do, we are going to have to put up guardrails and some safety valves there, that we are emphasizing school attendance and that school attendance is vitally important. The second reason that this consideration, this recommendation, I think is important, is in a lot of the school districts that have lower average daily attendance, often those are school districts that have a higher percentage of free and reduced lunch. They have students who are more economically disadvantaged. And just because of a result of society, many times those students may not have the encouragement at home to attend school on a regular basis. And I think that those districts are financially disadvantaged because of that. And those are the districts that need those funds more so. So I think it's important that we give consideration to this. And however we do this, as has been mentioned, there has to be a process where we're not causing harm to individual districts through the transition. But I'm looking forward to continued conversation on this, and we have some additional comments from Co-Chair Wise on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Thomas, also one thing I failed to mention, I think it was brought up at that last meeting. Representative Bant, if she's online, made a really good point, and I think, Mike, you may have said this too. We focus so much on attendance and having to do all this administrative work for attendance. We've gotten away from instruction models. I think we're thinking about the best interest of kids, and I'm not saying, Senator Thomas, that following attendance is not key to making sure that kids are in the classroom, but at the same time, focus on the instruction models. So I think that was another thing. I did fail to mention that in my opening comments, so I just want to make sure I had that on record.
We have a comment from Superintendent Fletcher.
Thank you, sir. I want to echo a couple of thoughts from Senator Wise and also from Representative Tipton. This is a Christmas wish list, as we talk about it. When we talk about ADM versus ADA, and also Representative Tipton also alluded to this, if you look at the districts that have lower attendance, they would benefit from this model because that increases the amount of funding that they would receive. Now, unless we add to the budget, you're going to have winners and losers. So one of the things that Representative Tipton mentioned was not cause harm. We don't want to cause harm to any district. So with that being said, I want us to keep in mind when we talk about average daily membership sounds great because that sounds like we're going to automatically increase funding for all. That's only if there's extra funds put into the education budget. And again, I just want to emphasize that. Again, when we talk about ADM, those districts that if we do not increase the education budget, then you're going to have the lower attendance districts increase, whereas maybe the higher attendance districts will decrease without extra funding. But again, the other item I would say is let's let the law and truancy handle the parts about attendance. I think when we take out attendance as far as funding, let's let the truancy that process we go through truancy, referring students to court. Let that take care of truancy, and let that take care of our attendance, and let's get that away from the funding portion. In my opinion, that's my thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Superintendent Burgess.
Just one last comment. I'd like to thank both chairs for the work on this because it's my 27th year in education, and this is the first time I can remember us really looking at things in a different light versus always saying, we've always done it this way. We've always done ADA, so why look at ADM? Or we've always, done some of these things. So I really, really appreciate that, and I'd like to echo the comments that I think this is the first step to really improving some things that we haven't had an opportunity to do over the last couple of years due to some funding issues. So thank you very much for that. And Representative Thomas, I can guarantee you all districts will do their very best to ensure every kid's in the school because we know how important it is when they're there, and it makes life so much easier on the families and the teachers if every kid's at school every day. So thank you very much for that.
We have a comment from Robin Kinney with KDE.
Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, I just want to express our appreciation on behalf of the Kentucky Department of Education for allowing us to be a member of the task force and also for having school district superintendents and school board members represented. They are the people that are on the ground assisting our students and our staff every single day. And it's such a wonderful conversation that we've been allowed to participate in. Also, to allow us to continue in that participation and also to provide any data or information, we stand ready and willing to be accessible to you and look forward to continuing the conversation on behalf of students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. I don't see anyone else who's asked to be recognized at this time. So speak up if you do, but I'll go ahead and close us out. And again, I want to thank all the task force members or legislative members or superintendents or school board members or participation from KDE, all our participants who testified and shared information. This has been a very informative, a very worthwhile process, but I want to echo the comments that were made. This is a process that we're just beginning. This is a process that we have to continue going forward as we develop policies and make decisions about how to best fund education for all students in Kentucky. I would be remiss if I did not thank our staff here at LRC. In particular, Joshua Collins has done a tremendous amount of work as our lead staff member, and let's show Josh our appreciation.
Person day.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. And I want to thank all our staff members who participated in this. At this time, we will be adjourning the task force for this session. We will submit this report to the Legislative Research Commission, and we'll look forward to hearing from your inputs as we go into the 2022 session and develop and try to implement some of these recommendations. This task force meeting is adjourned.